Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Barry Beckham. With regard to PTE-AV-Studio, what in fact are frames and how may we use them? Well, perhaps we can come at this with a simple project. Now, I think a project allows us to see the techniques used in a practical way. The technique or tool is easier to relate to and therefore to understand. And with a project we get a better feel for how it's used, and sometimes we can get some ideas too. Frames can help us with our animation, but they're most likely to be used in a parent and child technique. So we need to say a word or two about that first. A parent, as we know, may have one child or several. In our case here, using PTE-AV-Studio, we only need to animate just the parent. The child will follow. We can attach one or a dozen children to our parent image, video or object, and all the children will take on the animation of the parent. The children won't require any animation at all. However, the child's status doesn't prevent us from animating that child if we have a need to. Let's take a practical look at the parent and child relationship before we move on and take a look at frames. I'd like to draw your attention to the two images I'm using here. You can see them in the mini player on the beige background, but here is the image I'm going to use as the parent and this one as the child. Just take a note of the file names here because we can change the file names in the objects and animation screen to make animation a little bit easier. So if I go back to my image, select it and open the objects and animation screen, the first thing we'll see in the bottom right corner is the two images in question now have a label of parent and child. Now maybe a good place to start here is to select the left hand end of the timeline, and in fact it's already selected. I'll press play and you can see the animation that I've created. And as a reminder, we're looking at the parent is the top left and the child is the image on the bottom right. So with the parent selected, if we look at the keyframes, we can see exactly what's been done. But I think first of all I need to go up and select my animation tab so we can see the values. So selecting the first keyframe then, you can see that my parent image is animated from off the screen onto the screen. It starts with a pan over on the left and up. I've got a reduction in the zoom and I've also got changes in the rotation, both the C, Y and X. That gives it that odd look. But when it comes down to its keyframe 5 seconds later, the image is more or less square on screen. We've got a little bit of rotation and a little bit of Y in the rotation there too. But when I go to the child, we only see one keyframe, and if we remember, this keyframe is created automatically by the software. We've got no second keyframe, so the movement of this image is related to this one. Doesn't stop me from moving this image. For example, if I wanted the place that these two are going to come to a stop with this image slightly higher, or I wanted to do something like that, then when I put my cursor back there, the change is in place, but the movement is all controlled by the parent. Now, as you can see here by the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up a different project. I'm going to select the image with the balloons here and open the objects and animation screen, and we'll take a look at how this has been created. If you look over on the right hand side, you'll see that as yet we don't have any frames created at all. A frame is simply a transparent object that we can use as a parent. If we're aware we're going to require a frame at the start of our project, when we first create it. We can then select the frame and add images, video or objects directly to it. When we do that, they will be children of the parent. But don't worry if you forget to do this or you don't see the need until later. That happens to me quite a bit. It's actually very easy to remedy with a cut and paste, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So let me take you through what I've already set up here and how a frame may help us. Looking over to the bottom right corner, you can see the 5 images are labelled BD 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. I'm going to hold my shift key and select all of them, top to bottom. Now you can see the keyframes of all 5 of those images are identical. So I've got exactly the same animation into each of these as well. But at the end point, of course, they're all going to look like that on screen. So what have I done to begin the animation? Well, let's select the keyframe of just BD8 and I'll go up to my animation tab and we'll take a look. Now for this purpose I think we can ignore the pan control just for a moment, because this just allowed me to position all 5 along the screen. The important parts of the animation is the zoom. They've all been zoomed down to 45 so I can get all 5 nicely presented. But if you look at the rotate Y, you can see I've got a rotate Y value of 100, and I've got exactly the same setting in each of these. If I select BD7, and if you look up at the top right, you can see that the Y rotation remains at 100, and it's going to be the same for every single one. So all I've really got is the images slightly turned towards us, and the animation when I press play just turns them back. So if when we started this project we knew right from the start we was going to use a frame, then perhaps we should have created the frame over on the right hand side, right clicked the frame and added all of these images as children of the frame parent. But we didn't, and that happens from time to time. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all 5 of those images. I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose cut. Now they'll disappear, but don't worry about that, they're just saved on the clipboard. I want to make sure there's no selections in this box now, so I need to just click to remove that bounding box around my sky background. When I've done that, if I right click again, I'm going to choose to add a frame. And then with the frame selected, right click over the frame and I can paste. Now we'll see all 5 of my balloon pictures are now children of the parent, which is frame 1. And remember, we can change the name of frame 1 if we want to, up in the properties here. So I could call it my parent frame. Now while my cursor is way up at the top here, I'm going to just click the animation tab because I want to make use of that next. Now just a few moments ago I selected all of these images and demonstrated that we could see all of the keyframes on the left hand side. Don't forget, if you start to have a lot of objects on the right hand side, you can adjust the screen accordingly. But I can add the parent keyframe too. And like any image, video or object, the first keyframe of the parent frame is always created for us. So let's add some animation into the frame and see how that's going to affect the images and their presentation. Remember, if I just press play just for a moment, you're reminded of what the animation is doing purely to the balloons. So I'd like to animate the frame, and I'd like to do that over the same animation time as the rest of the images here, 4 seconds. I can place my cursor in that position, and if I drag it left and right, it's difficult to find the 4-second point. So what I could do is add a keyframe at any point, and I'm going to hit the insert key on my keyboard, because if I pick it up and move it now, it'll snap to that 4-second point. So that's the end point of the animation of my frame. This is going to be the beginning. So where do I want my frame to be at the beginning? Well, let's go up to the animation tab at the top right of the screen, because I want to break the link between the zoom X and the zoom Y. All we need to do is just click the link. Now the reason I want to do that is I want to go to my zoom X, place my cursor over the X, click and drag, because I want to collapse that a little bit. I'm distorting the whole frame, and I want to use my pan X to push that way over to the left hand side off frame. But I do need to remember to come back to my keyframe at the end and make sure that I do tick the boxes for the options that I've chosen here. So I'm going to tick the top 3. Now I can put my cursor back at the start, and you get a feel for how the frame as a parent is affecting the animation of those 5 images that previously just spun around on the screen. Now it's almost impossible for me to generate super smooth demos on screen while recording a screen capture as I am. So if you see any jumping in these images, you can be rest assured that when you create animation like this, it will be super smooth. But watch how this comes to a stop. It stops with a bit of a clonk. And that's because I've got no speed values put into the parent frame. The frame begins life off screen and comes to a stop on screen. So I'm going to suggest the speed option you want in the first keyframe is slow down. So we've got a pan, and we've also got a zoom. And for good measure, in case I change things in a minute, which is very likely, I'm going to put the slow down also into the rotate options too. Now if I press play once again, see if you can see the difference, but concentrate on how the whole thing comes to a gentle stop. You can see how these speed options are much easier on the eye. So here we're putting our frame to good use. Let's move my cursor down so we can see those images. So once I've got the frame in place, I could try a little experimentation. Maybe if I select the first keyframe of my parent, I can experiment with some of the other options up at the top right. Maybe I could rotate my images a little bit. That may mean dragging them a little bit more to the left. Maybe I'll use my pan Y. You can see this is very quick and easy because at any stage I can just press play and I can observe exactly what I've just created. The frame opens up creative opportunities, but there's a little more too. In fact, quite a bit more, but we're just going to stay with the basics here. Now of course we don't need to have all of our images selected here. If I click back over in the bottom right corner, I can remove all of those and I can just look individually at the parent. I could try to see what effect it has if I give another couple of seconds for the frame to appear on screen and how that impacts the animation we've created. You can see there's an awful lot of variation here that we can put in place. That looked okay too. Now what I've just done is to reset my keyframe here back to its original 4-second point. Because what I want to do is to add some more animation into my frame, because we can often use a frame to remove a batch of images from the screen as a whole. If we didn't use a parent frame at all here and we just used these images, if I wanted all of these to be animated off the screen, I'm going to have to animate all 5 of them. The frame can take all 5 in one go. So if I go back to my parent frame, I'll put my cursor up here and hit the insert key once and twice, because I need one of them at the end of my timeline, and assuming I want 4 seconds for the image to leave the screen, and 4 seconds was good on, so 4 seconds would be reasonable off, then this keyframe needs to go at the 11-second point. So if I adjust that with keyframe time, so let's just think what we have here. Start of our animation, presenting our images. Nothing happens between these two because we're viewing 5 images. But between here and here, we want the images to leave the screen. So I'd like to make a start by going to my zoom controls and resetting the chain link to be solid, so I can click and drag over the X to reduce the size of the image. And to remove it from the screen, maybe I'll go to my rotate X and I'll allow it to, let's spin backwards a little bit, that way. Can't scroll too far here. I could put the values in, but we'll just scroll it around a couple of times. And I think I'll use my pan Y to take it off the screen. Now there's a couple of things we need to do here. If I come back and select now my third keyframe, things look a little bit odd. None of these have been turned on. So I'm going to turn these on, and you can see how turning them on affects the animation. So recap. There's a start of the animation. This is the point where we can evaluate the images until we reach the 11-second point. Between 11 seconds, we're going to lose that from the screen in the way we've just input into the animation controls. But one more thing, we need to remember speed. If we come back to this keyframe sets up the movement off the screen. Remember, we're dealing with the parent frame only. If we're moving something off the screen, then slowing it down is generally not going to work. I'm going to go up to my pan, and here with the animation speed I'm going to choose accelerate the zoom as well, and although I've rotated it, I could actually select the speed for all of the others in case I wanted to come back and make changes. It's a personal choice, but let's have a look at what we have. Place the cursor back at the start and press play. So there we have the images rotating but being controlled onto the position of the screen to view by the frame, and then the frame is going to remove them. But of course, if we don't care too much for the animation we've just created, now we've only got to change the frame. If I select my end point once again, I can always double click my pan Y. I could double click my rotate X and also the zoom, and I could choose something completely different. If I just wanted something like, let's say, a revolving to the right and maybe also a zoom right the way down. Let's try, and we'll start the process from about that point. Press play. You can see the differences we can input into the presentation of our images. Remembering, of course, by the time the movement here gets to this point, now that image or set of 5 images are going to be removed from the screen. Now with the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up a new image, a background image, into the Objects and Animation screen. As is the case quite often, the image is selected here. We can see that with the blue bar in the bottom right corner. We can also see that with the bounding box around the image above. So if I wanted to add a frame here, of course the frame would be created as a child of the background image, and I can quickly demonstrate that by right clicking, choosing add frame, and there we can see the relationship once again, that little staggered effect we see, which says that that is the parent and the frame in this case is the child, because the background was selected when I introduced the frame. I'll delete the frame If we click into the box and we remove any selections and I right click and add a frame now the frame is freestanding. It becomes a parent, although it's not going to become a parent until we add an image or two. So let me just add a couple. I'm going to right click here, choose add and select image. Now from the images that I have here, another good feature, we don't have to pick these one at a time. If I wanted to present 3 images together, I could select all 3 of those and open them up together. Not only that, we now see them as children of the parent frame, but if I wanted to reduce the size of all of those images together, if I select them all by holding the control key in the box over here, and I can do the same thing with the keyframes here, then when I go up to the top right to the zoom option and I decide to zoom the image so that they're slightly smaller on screen, I can affect all images in one go. So in a nutshell, a frame will help us control a number of images to animate them, but it can also be used in a creative way, because if we add one animation to the image and a different animation to the frame, we can make some quite creative effects. Now as you can see by the images down here, I borrowed these from another technique called animated picture-in-picture, another great way to present images in PTE-AV-Studio. Now bear with me just for a moment. I'm just going to adjust all of these images together a little more. I'm just going to make them a bit smaller on screen, and using the pan control, I'm just going to split them up, just something like that. Because we know when we select the frame will control, in our case, 3 images, but it could be 33. Whether we want to pan them, zoom them, or rotate them, we can do anything we wish. There is one thing we cannot do. While we've got the frame selected, we cannot globally change the opacity of the images within the frame. Now that's a little bit of a shame, and I'm sure it's a feature that we'll see added sometime in the future. But just for the moment, we cannot do that. But one of the options we can use is blur. We can select the frame, and between keyframes, we could affect the blur of the images just by using the frame. And I can demonstrate that pretty easy by just clicking and scrolling to the right over the letter R in the blur options. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen once again, I've brought you into a new screen in PTE-AV-Studio because I put together a few demos which you can install as slide styles. Let me demonstrate how you can do that, and you can download them from my website, and if you're viewing on YouTube, I'll put a link down below. I'm going to go down to my Styles and Themes button, go to my Tools and choose Import Style. I've got mine on a USB stick, but there's the group of styles that I refer to. I'm going to open this, and if we look for it, there it is there. Now you'll notice here you don't have to put any images in this at all. I've included all of the images. So just by selecting a style here, you can see exactly what's going to happen, but you can open this up into the Objects and Animations screen, and you can take a look at where the frame fits into the visuals that you're seeing, and you can play around with that frame to see what effects you can create. As you can see, I've got 5 different ones here, but they're all based on more or less the same principle. But it's quite good fun to play around with these, especially to work through and look at how the frame is affecting the images both on and off the screen. Now you'll notice that last one jumped off the screen quite abruptly. There it goes. Well, sometimes you may need an adjustment, but you've got to bear in mind that between that image and the next, you're likely to have a transition, and that's going to make it look fairly sweet. Now, to bring this video to a close, I've added all of those slide styles to blank images, and I'm going to move my cursor to the start and press play, and you can have a look in the mini player just to see the sort of effect that those styles with the frames is going to give. If you're viewing this video on YouTube, please consider giving it a thumbs up, if it's worthy of course, and also subscribing to my channel. Hit the notification bell and you'll be informed when I next put up a video. PTE-AV-Studio is great fun, a superb way to present the images that we spend so much time and trouble producing. Thanks for watching.